Move over Cosmo and Helen Gurley Brown, there is a new glossy Evie magazine. It's billed as a publication for conservative women. Established in 2019, the magazine was created for the modern conservative woman. Instead of preaching feminism, it prefers femininity. The 33-year-old co-founder, Brittany Hugo Boom, says the publication embraces female traditional roles. Evie promotes family and being a wife and mother. It has also caught the attention of big names on the right like Candace Owens and Gen Zer Brett Cooper.
At first glance, pretty pictures and fashion tips appear non-partisan. But the magazine weaves in conservative-leaning content. Recent examples include articles criticising no-fault divorce or IVF. Evie positions motherhood as being under attack and highlights falling birth rates in the US. Last year, those birth rates hit a historic low, 1,616.5 births per 1,000 women. Meanwhile, a recently published article in the Wall Street Journal reveals American women are lukewarm on marriage. The journal's survey last year found 58% of women ages 18 to 29 reported that marriage was at least somewhat essential to the American dream.
When broken down by ideology, conservative outlet Daily Signal published a 2025 report that found conservative women aged 18 to 40 are married at rates that are 20 percentage points higher than liberal women in the same age group. The same survey found 37% of conservative women say they are completely satisfied with their life, compared to 12% of liberal women and 28% of moderates.
I'm certainly not going to go first on this one, Amber.
Sure.
Tell me what you think either of Evie or of these statistics.
Yeah, well, I'll start with Evie, and then there's another magazine I'd throw in here called The Conservator. And as someone who grew up reading women's magazines, obviously, like Teen Vogue and Cosmopolitan when I was a little bit older, I have long thought that there was a really significant political bias in those magazines, and frankly, a cultural bias. You don't read much about marriage in Cosmopolitan.
Right.
It's a lot about casual hookups. There's a lot about abortion. A lot about birth control without any commentary on potential side effects of that medication. It's sort of just taken for granted. And I think it's nice to have an alternative, even if, you know, I noticed in the script we were like, oh, well, it gets political. Well, so do the other women's magazines that are on the left side. So I thought this was long overdue, and I think a really positive development. I appreciate these magazines for what they're doing. On the marriage front, there's a lot of things that we could get into here, and a lot of potential issues, I think. I would start with the fact that when we're looking at these statistics about conservative women being married at higher rates, I think there's two elements here. One is that conservative women seem to have more positive views overall towards things like marriage and children and family. But second, women get more conservative when they get married and have children. So I think there's two things contributing to that data point, which is, again, when you're already conservative, more likely to do those things, and when you do those things, more likely to become conservative.
Yeah, and so there is a very big split. We've been talking in various rising shows about young voters and the way that has changed, but actually the gender split there is pretty huge. And what seems to be the case is that the most liberal bloc is unmarried women, I should say single women rather than unmarried probably, with college degrees are very, very liberal. And then married women are more conservative, women without college degrees are more conservative. And on the male side, basically the college-educated men are more likely to be more liberal, and if they are single, they're, you know, much the same. So there is very interesting social dynamics going on here. One of the things that I was interested in some of these statistics that the journal piece had was the idea that a lot of women appear more reluctant to get married, in part because female graduation rates now outstrip those of men. And so, for example, in a Pew survey, actually American Enterprise Institute survey, half of college-educated women said that one of the reasons they were not married is they have not met anyone who meets their expectations. There's another survey last year saying that within under 35 women, basically, under the age of 35, 47% of women have college degrees, 37% of men do. So I wonder about how the interplay of academic qualifications and the economic prospects that brings plays into all of this.
I think it's a huge part of it. I'm going to get a little bit into women's psychology here, which can be a dangerous place, but I guess if anyone's going to speak on this panel, it should be me.
Shouldn't be me.
Women don't want to marry down.
Right. Okay.
And so once you have a college degree or you get a master's and you're making a certain amount of money, a lot of women are very put off by the idea of marrying a guy who makes less money than them or has a lower educational attainment level. And so when you have women graduating at higher rates than men, and recent data about the pay gap, which is a whole separate debate, found that actually recently graduated single women living in big cities make more money than men, as opposed to less, which is sort of the common commentary about the pay gap, which tends to come out due to choices later in life, like getting married and having kids, etc. So you have this whole cohort of young women who would typically be in the prime age to consider getting married, who are out earning and out competing men of a similar status. So you're sort of enshrining those inequalities that would lead a woman to be less likely to pick a mate.
Well, and what do you think of that as a conservative woman? I imagine that on the one hand, I assume that you like or celebrate the fact that more and more women have college degrees. And on the other hand, if men are lagging behind that, it makes women less inclined to marry, or as you would put it, marry down. I'm assuming, as somebody who is culturally conservative, you think that marriage is a good thing and a good institution. So is there any conflict or any tension between those two dynamics in your case?
There's a few things going on here, and I've thought about this issue very deeply, as you can imagine, over the past few years. One thing I would say is on the cultural perception of marriage. Marriage is less talked about in American culture as the way I would view it, which is a covenant before God. But even more broadly than that, outside of a religious nature, a partnership, of a complementary relationship that allows people to elevate each other. And it's spoken about in a lot of ways as a business arrangement. As you hear a lot of commentary on TikTok, for example, just to use that as anecdotal evidence, of women talking about like the percentage split of who does chores in the household. And if you are counting inputs in your relationship in a very numerical fashion, sorry, but that's not the recipe for a good marriage. Keeping score, trying to find a 50-50 split on anything is a recipe for disaster. Marriage is never going to be 50-50. There's going to be times when one person is contributing way more and vice versa, and you have to have a lot of grace with your partner. And so I think the idea that marriage is this institution where both sides are always 50% and everything's equally split is just not a realistic way of looking at the institution. And then getting into this higher education issue and the issue with careers. When I was growing up, I'm a younger millennial, there was a lot of messaging targeted towards women that from third wave feminists, that the way to be an empowered, successful woman was to go to college and work in a high-powered career and climb the corporate ladder as fast as you can. And I think what we've seen from that is that women are unhappier than ever. We have young women on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medications at a higher rate, and the rate of prescriptions for those is actually increasing faster than men of a similar age. And it suggests to me that this messaging was deeply flawed, because I view men and women as very different. They have different motivations. They have different things that make them feel content in their lives, feel happy in their lives, feel like their lives have purpose. And as more women have gone to college and entered the workforce, we've seen a similar decline in happiness. And so I think we have to question why that is, and why was marriage and child rearing really taken out of the conversation as what would be considered a successful woman. And just speaking from personal experience, my mother was a homemaker. She left the workforce to raise kids when my dad ended up graduating from trade school. And she was people looked down their nose at her as if she was doing something that was less than. And women feel that social impact and that cultural impact, and it causes them to make different choices.
I think just in relation to someone in a situation like your mother, I'm often struck by the fact that even now, I think the media, particularly when it is covering political stories regarding women, often not only deals in stereotypes, but deals in one of two stereotypes, one of which is a very liberal pro-choice, usually urban, often well-educated woman, and who is sort of the emblem of the liberal side, and then a very religious, perhaps very anti-abortion, very religiously observant, ultra-conservative. And I think one of the things that is often missing there is women in approximately similar situations to your mother who choose to stay at home. Presumably, I imagine in your mom's case, draw quite a lot of their identity from that and don't think that it automatically dictates their political views. I mean, they can have whatever views they like. That sort of middle ground, I think, often is missed whenever, women and politics in particular is called.
Yeah, I think that's right. And when you see young women and some of the trends that have been emerging on social media over the past few years, it's been things like the trad wife trend or the clean girl aesthetic, which is like a more modest way of dressing than you might see on your typical OnlyFans creator's account. And that indicates to me that there is a hunger for some kind of return to what is a more traditional arrangement between men and women among Gen Z. Even as those women politically have become more liberal, we've also seen at the same time that some of their desires for their lives would be considered culturally conservative.
I take that point, absolutely. I think that oftentimes changes, whether they're political or social changes, are kind of a pendulum. And I think that a lot of the coverage that extols, singledom or career women or sex without commitment was a reaction to the repression of those things or the discouragement of those things in a previous generation. And I think therefore there was an understandable celebration among more progressive or liberal or whatever term you want to use, women, of things that are more celebratory of that. Now, it may well be the case. I mean, I'm not saying that women should adopt a lifestyle that doesn't fit them. If someone wants a more traditional lifestyle, I certainly don't think they should be demeaned for it.
Yeah, I agree. All right, that's going to do it for us today on Rising. Fun little conversation to wrap up. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we are now available anywhere you listen to podcasts.